A woman lies unconscious in the heart of a remote forest, cold, bleeding, and alone. No phone. No one coming. But then, something unbelievable happens. From the shadows of the trees, a lone wolf appears and freezes. Just meters away, a massive brown bear steps into the clearing. The two predators lock eyes. What happens next isn't a fight. It isn't a hunt. It's a moment so powerful, so full of instinct, emotion, and impossible understanding that even the wolf couldn't believe it. This is the story of what one wild bear did and how it saved a human life in a way no one expected. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications to never miss stories that reveal the heart hidden in the wild. Now, prepare yourself, because this story will change the way you see animals forever. Her name was Emily Reese. A 33-year-old wildlife photographer, she had spent the last 2 weeks camping alone in Washington's Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, tracking eagles, photographing wolves, and living completely off-grid. It was her dream, her escape. But on day 13, things went horribly wrong. Emily had wandered further than she should have, chasing movement she thought might be a snow owl. The terrain was steep, the air thin. She hadn't eaten in nearly 18 hours. And then, everything blurred. A sharp pain tore through her chest. Her knees gave out. She collapsed face first onto pine needles and frost. Her camera landed beside her. The world went quiet. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Then, a presence. Not the wind, not an echo. Something heavy, breathing, watching. A wolf. A lone gray wolf stood just beyond the trees, golden eyes fixed on her motionless body. His fur was mottled from winter shedding, his ribs slightly visible beneath his coat. He'd been tracking elk. But now, this. He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, ears pricked. Then he stopped, because something was coming. A deeper sound. Heavy footfalls. From behind a cluster of fir trees, the forest opened, and a brown bear emerged. Massive, muscular, old, with a scar over its left eye and a limp in its rear leg. The wolf snarled, low and defensive. His posture dropped, ready to flee or fight. But the bear didn't charge. He didn't roar. He looked at Emily. Then, unbelievably, he approached. Step by slow, deliberate step, his breath steaming in the cold. The wolf backed away. He watched, ears twitching with confusion, as the bear lowered his head and sniffed Emily's cheek. Then the bear did something the wolf had never seen before. He sat down, right beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't sniff again. He simply stayed, protecting her, guarding her. From what, the wolf didn't know. But in the deep, wild language of the forest, the meaning was clear. She's not prey. She's mine to watch now. Emily's hand twitched. She wasn't dead, but she was close. And if no one came soon, she would be. And the bear, who had once lost something of his own in these same woods, seemed determined not to let that happen again. The bear's name, though no human ever gave him one, was known in ranger records as Old Scar. He was estimated to be over 20 years old, a survivor of countless winters, lost cubs, and violent encounters. Rangers had spotted him limping across the upper basin for years, always alone, never aggressive, just wandering. But no one knew his story, not like the forest did, not like he remembered. 10 winters ago, in a clearing not far from where Emily now lay, the old bear had been a father. 2 cubs. One had fallen through a cracked ice patch while he was away foraging. When he returned to the den and heard the cries, he ran. But it was too late. Only 1 cub survived the winter, and even that little one, weak from hunger and cold, vanished after a late spring snow. Since then, he never claimed a den again. He roamed. He watched. He stayed away from humans, always, except the one time he watched a hiker leave trash by a tree, and a smaller bear choked to death on a plastic container. After that, something changed in him. He didn't hate humans, but he understood them. They broke things, and sometimes they suffered for it. Now, here he was again, beside a fragile body, face bruised and lips pale, lying in almost the exact place where his last cub had died. She wasn't a bear, but she was small, she was hurt, and she was alone. So, he stayed. The wolf didn't leave either. He circled the edge of the clearing, confused but curious. Every now and then, he crept forward and sniffed the air. The bear wouldn't let him come closer, but he didn't chase him off either. And that, in the language of predators, meant something rare: permission to witness. As the day faded, snow began to fall. Emily's breaths became shallower. Her face twitched, lips dry, fingers blue. The bear lay beside her, his body radiating warmth. At one point, he nudged her shoulder, not roughly, but with intent. Her eyelids fluttered. A groan escaped her throat. He grunted, low and soft, a sound not unlike a mother bear calling her cub back toward safety. The wolf tilted his head at the sound. There was no attack here, no violence, just the unexpected alliance of 3 creatures who, by all laws of nature, should never share the same space. A few miles away, a park ranger named Lucas Hale sat in a lookout cabin, scanning the snowfall with binoculars. He hadn't seen Emily in days. Her camp was cold, her gear untouched, and he feared the worst. By dawn, Lucas would begin tracking her signal, and when he arrived, he wouldn't believe what he found. Lucas Hale had been a park ranger for nearly 15 years. He'd rescued hikers from hypothermia, chased off bears from trash bins, and once helped airlift a botanist who'd been bitten by a snake he was trying to photograph. But nothing prepared him for what he saw that morning. At first, it was just the signal. Emily's emergency beacon had flickered on around 5:42 a.m., weak but alive. Lucas didn't waste time. Snowshoes on, rifle slung for protection, not use, med kit packed. He cut through 2 miles of powdery forest. The trees were thick, and wind blew sharp across his face. But the sun was up, and light was on his side. He didn't expect to find her alive, and certainly not like this. There she was, curled beside a massive brown bear. Not mauled, not clawed, not even touched in harm. just there. Her cheeks red with windburn, her eyes closed, but her chest rising shallowly. Her body tucked almost against the bear's flank, the heavy steam of his breath drifting into the frozen air above them both. And just a few paces away, a wolf, still, watching. Lucas froze. He didn't reach for the rifle. He didn't dare move. The bear turned its head slightly. Not aggressive, not defensive, just acknowledging, as if to say, "She's still breathing. You're late." Lucas whispered, "Holy hell." He slowly dropped his pack and crouched. Emily's pulse was faint but present. Her skin was cold, but not frozen. He reached for her carefully, eyes never leaving the bear. And when he touched her, the bear stood. Lucas's heart pounded. But the animal didn't charge. It didn't growl. It stepped back, just far enough for Lucas to lift Emily's head and wrap a blanket around her. Then the bear did something Lucas would later replay in his head 100 times. It turned, took one last long look at Emily, and walked away. No fear, no rush, no sound. Just dignity. The wolf lingered. Lucas glanced at him. "You coming too?" The wolf stared at him for a moment, then turned and followed the bear into the forest. Hours later, at the ranger station, Emily lay in a warm cot, hooked to an IV. A medic said she'd had mild frostbite, signs of severe exhaustion, and dangerously low blood sugar. But she'd live. When Lucas told the story to the EMTs, they laughed at first. But when he showed them the photos he'd taken, blurry, half-shaking shots of a human, a grizzly, and a wolf in a perfect triangle, no one laughed again. Instead, they stood in silence, until one of them said, "That bear didn't save her by accident," and no one argued. Lucas didn't report the bear's behavior in the official log. He just wrote, "Found missing woman. Assisted recovery. Wildlife observed. One adult grizzly bear. Non-threatening behavior. No action required." Because what really happened didn't belong in a file. It belonged in something deeper, maybe even sacred. Emily Reese opened her eyes 2 days after the rescue. It took her a full hour to piece together where she was, what had happened, and why there were forest rangers watching her like they'd seen a ghost. Lucas sat beside her bed. He waited for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was a whisper. "The bear didn't hurt me. He saved me." Lucas nodded. "We saw." At first, Emily thought it was a hallucination, that she'd imagined the weight of the bear's warmth, the steady beat of his breath, the shape of a wolf on the edge of vision. But when Lucas showed her the photos he'd taken from the clearing, a massive brown bear lying beside her still body, a lone wolf standing guard just beyond the tree line, she broke into tears, not from fear, but from awe. "I don't understand why," she whispered. Lucas only said, "I think you reminded him of something." A week later, Emily was well enough to walk, but she didn't want to go home yet. Not before saying goodbye. Not before knowing if the bear, old Scar, was still out there. So Lucas brought her back. No gear, No trackers, no drones, just the trail and the trees and hope. They waited 3 hours in silence. Then, just before sunset, they saw movement beyond the ridge. A slow, lumbering shape, alone. He didn't come close, but he stopped, looked, blinked, and Emily raised her hand in the cold air, not to wave, but just to be seen. The bear huffed softly, then turned and disappeared into the trees. That night, Emily posted a single photo, no filters, no hashtags, just an image of the bear, distant, gentle, leaving the clearing. And this caption: "I was dying in the snow when a bear found me. He didn't attack. He didn't run. He lay beside me and kept me warm. A wolf stood watch. The forest became my shelter, not my end. This isn't a miracle. This is nature, and I'll spend the rest of my life protecting it." Within 48 hours, the post went viral. Major wildlife publications picked it up. TV networks begged for interviews. But Emily refused the spotlight. Instead, she launched something else. A conservation initiative called Guardians of the Wild, a fund supporting protected zones for apex predators and better wilderness education. She started with one goal: let's protect the places where the animals already understand compassion better than we do. Donations poured in. Thousands signed petitions to expand the sanctuary zones in Washington forests. And somewhere deep in those woods, the old brown bear wandered, unaware of his new status. A symbol, not of fear, but of mercy. Spring returned early that year. The snow melted quickly, revealing moss-covered trails and the glint of distant creeks breaking free from ice. Emily had stayed close, not in the hospital, not in her old city life, but in a cabin near the ranger station. Simpler, quieter. She couldn't go back to who she'd been before the forest. Not after what happened. Not after who had saved her. Each morning she would hike to the edge of the clearing where it all began. Not to photograph, just to sit, to listen, to remember. But on the 10th morning of May, something changed. She wasn't alone. At first, she saw only movement. Then, the flash of gray fur. He stepped out from the underbrush like a ghost materializing, lean, alert, and unmistakable. The same lone wolf who had watched everything. He wasn't snarling, wasn't stalking. He just stood there, tail low, eyes on her, ears twitching with a curiosity that almost looked cautious. Emily's breath caught. Very slowly, she crouched down, lowered her gaze. She remembered the ranger's advice. Respect the space. Let them decide. She whispered, "You remember me." The wolf didn't run. He stepped closer. 2 steps, then 3, until he stood where the bear had once lain beside her. He sniffed the air, then the ground where her body had been. And then, something happened. He sat. Not a defensive posture. A choice. A signal. Emily's eyes filled with tears. For the next 20 minutes, they sat together in silence, a woman and a wild animal connected not by force, but by a shared memory. And before the wolf rose to leave, he did one more thing, He looked behind him and let out a single, low howl. Not a warning, not a call for help, but a message, a farewell. Later that week, rangers reported an unusual sighting, a den recently made. Inside, 2 small pups, healthy and well-fed. No signs of their mother. But claw marks near the edge of the den suggested a lone male had taken up the role of protector. Rare, but not impossible. Emily asked to visit just once. And when she stood outside the den's boundary, she heard it again. The same howl, same pitch, same rhythm. This time, with 2 tiny echoes. Back in her cabin that night, Emily wrote in her journal, "They saved me, and now he's saving them." Maybe this is what nature does when we stop trying to control it. It heals itself, and us. The idea came to her in a dream. A tree. Not just any tree, but a massive cedar, tall and old, rising from the earth where she nearly died. In the dream, its branches were filled with birds. A wolf slept in its roots. A bear leaned against its trunk. And at the base, a small stone read, "Forgiveness lives here." Emily woke up crying. It wasn't just a dream. It was a need. She reached out to the Park Service and the local tribal elders. She asked permission to plant a cedar at the edge of the clearing, not as a monument, not as a tourist site, but as a sanctuary. A place where no drones were allowed, no tagging, no fences, only memory and meaning. 3 weeks later, she stood beside Lucas and a small group of quiet volunteers. They carried the young cedar sapling in a wooden crate, soil still clinging to its roots. Rangers had cleared a small area, but left the land otherwise untouched. They wanted it to feel as wild as the day the bear first sat beside her. Before planting, Emily read aloud, "This tree stands for all that was lost, and all that chose to protect what could still be saved." Then, in silence, they placed it in the ground, covered the roots, watered the soil, and stepped back. The wolf returned that evening, not to the tree, but to the edge of the forest where he could see it. He sat for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on the cedar as wind moved gently through its leaves. Then he vanished again. Emily never saw him after that, but she knew he came back sometimes. She could feel it. The cedar tree became something more than any of them expected. Locals left stones at its base. Children painted tiny wooden tokens with bears and wolves and left them beneath the branches. A woman who had lost her brother to a hiking accident came and tied a strip of his flannel to one of the limbs. It fluttered like a prayer in the wind. A wildlife camera, the only one Emily ever allowed, caught a remarkable image a year later. A large bear, old and gray, resting beside the cedar tree, eyes closed, breathing slow, peaceful. They knew it was him, Old Scar. He hadn't been seen in months. Many thought he'd passed. But there he was, in the place where it all began, and maybe where he wanted it to end. Emily didn't return to city life, not ever. She stayed in the valley, in a small cabin less than a mile from the cedar tree. Her photography changed, too. It was no longer about capturing the perfect shot. Now it was about witnessing, about honoring. One morning, just before sunrise, she walked to the sanctuary clearing with her camera, like always. Except this time, she wasn't alone. A small boy, no older than 5, ran just ahead of her, laughing barefoot through the dew. His name was Jonas. She had adopted him after meeting his mother, a young woman who had survived domestic abuse and fled with her child into the wilderness, seeking shelter. Emily had offered them more than that. She offered them home. Now, Jonas called her mom, and every morning they walked to the cedar tree together. On that particular morning, something lay at the base of the tree, a stone, flat, weathered, but with markings. Emily picked it up and turned it over in her hand. There, in faded charcoal scratches, was a single, unmistakable claw print. Bare. Old scar. Tears filled her eyes. She sat beside the tree and let Jonas curl into her lap, both of them silent. She thought about the wolf, the way he'd looked at her one last time. She thought about the cold, the stillness, the way she'd been held between death and life, and how something wild, something feral, had chosen mercy. She whispered, "You gave me everything, and now, I promise, I'll give back." That year, she founded the Wild Grace Foundation, expanding conservation education to every U.S. school that asked for it. She spoke not about science alone, but about respect, about connection, about the deep language of trust that crossed the line between species. Children from all over the country sent letters to her, drawings of wolves and bears, cedar trees and stars. Many of them had never seen a wild animal before, but they believed. Jonas grew up in the shadow of that forest, under the watch of trees that had witnessed both life and loss. And on the day he turned 10, he brought his mother a gift, a smooth stone, painted with a wolf, a bear, and a woman, standing beneath a tree, and in a child's handwriting, "Thank you for being brave." Emily never became famous, but her story did, passed from ranger to hiker, from elder to child. Not a story of survival, a story of grace, a story of what happens when we see the wild not as a threat, but as a reflection of our best selves. In the darkest moment, a woman was saved, not by other humans, but by the wild itself. A bear laid beside her, a wolf stood guard, and a forest held its breath. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who still believes in the beauty of connection, even where we least expect it. Because sometimes, the greatest gift isn't survival. It's the reminder that we were never alone.
A police officer was on his usual winter patrol when he spotted an abandoned cabin deep in the snow. Inside, bound with ropes and a muzzle, lay a battered old German shepherd, barely breathing. But the moment the officer's flashlight caught the dog's eyes, he froze. Because this wasn't just any dog. It was Shadow, his missing canine partner who had vanished 3 years ago, the same night his best friend was killed in an ambush. How had Shadow survived all these years? And why was he here, broken and discarded, in the very place tied to the gang they could never catch? What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in loyalty and second chances. The wind in Silver Creek carried the bite of deep winter that morning. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a sky the color of cold steel, settling on the roofs of quiet homes and the endless pines that framed the outskirts of town. It was a place that looked peaceful at first glance, but anyone in law enforcement knew the truth. Small towns could hide big secrets. Sergeant Ethan Cole, 38, was the kind of man who wore the years on his face without apology. Tall, broad-shouldered, his frame still carried the strength from a decade of military service before he traded camouflage for the navy blue of the Silver Creek Police Department. His brown hair, peppered with early gray at the temples, was kept short, and his eyes, steel blue, rarely gave away what he was thinking. Since the night his best friend and partner, Officer Ryan Miller, was killed in an ambush 3 years ago, Ethan had grown quieter. He still did his job with unwavering dedication, but those close to him noticed he carried a shadow in his gaze, a constant reminder of that night. The patrol route today took him beyond the last paved road, down a trail where snow lay thick over hard-packed dirt. The police SUV crunched along slowly, tires breaking the icy crust, the heater humming in a futile attempt to push back the cold. Ethan's radio crackled with the occasional burst of static, but the landscape was otherwise silent, too silent, even for the outskirts. He was just about to turn back toward the main road when something caught his attention. A narrow path veered off into the woods, tire tracks half buried under fresh snow. At the end of that path, half hidden between skeletal aspens, sat a weathered log cabin. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, windows clouded with frost and grime, the kind of place the town's children probably dared each other to approach on Halloween. Ethan stepped out into the cold. The air hit him like a wall, sharp enough to sting his lungs. His boots crunched over the icy ground as he approached the cabin, the sound muffled by the thick blanket of snow. The front porch groaned under his weight, the wood brittle with age and neglect. He tried the door unlocked. The smell hit him first. A mix of damp wood, rusted metal, and something alive but fading. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light seeping through cracked boards. That's when he heard it. A chain dragging, a ragged, shallow breath. The sound came from the far corner, where the shadows pooled thickest. Ethan's hand hovered near the grip of his sidearm, not out of fear, but readiness. He took a cautious step closer. That's when the shape moved. It was a dog, large even in its hunched state. A German shepherd, its once proud coat now dull and matted, patches of fur missing to reveal raw, weathered skin beneath. Its muzzle was bound tight with a strip of worn leather, its legs secured with rope. Every breath rattled through its chest, each one a fight. But its eyes. Those eyes burned with a light Ethan knew better than his own reflection. Shadow. For a heartbeat, he couldn't move. Memories slammed into him. Shadow racing ahead during patrols, sitting at Ryan's side during briefings, tail wagging when the job was done. After that night 3 years ago, they'd found Ryan's body, but Shadow had vanished without a trace. Ethan had told himself the dog was gone, that it was kinder to believe it than to imagine what might have happened. And yet, here he was. Ethan dropped to one knee, the cold seeping through his uniform pants. "Easy, boy. It's me," he said softly, voice catching on the words. Shadow's ears twitched, and for a moment his body trembled, not from fear, but recognition. Ethan reached for his knife, cutting the ropes one by one. The leather muzzle came last. As it fell away, Shadow coughed, sides heaving. Up close, Ethan could see the scars, old ones that spoke of years of hard service, and fresh ones that told of more recent cruelty. Somebody had hurt him, deliberately. That's when Ethan noticed something else. On the far wall, partly hidden under peeling wallpaper, was a crude symbol painted in deep red. A vulture with outstretched wings. His stomach tightened. Red vultures, a gang, Ryan had been investigating before he died. Shadow's head lifted weakly, his gaze fixed not on Ethan but on a door at the back of the cabin. It was small, bolted shut, with rust crawling over the hinges. Whatever was behind it, Shadow wanted Ethan to see. Before he could move, the sound of snow crunching outside made him tense. He stood, instinctively shifting to block Shadow from view. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Officer Kate Ramirez new to Silver Creek PD just 2 weeks into her transfer from Phoenix. She was in her late 20s, medium height with dark brown hair pulled into a practical bun. Her build was lean and athletic, her brown eyes sharp with focus, yet carrying a warmth that made her easy to talk to. Kate had a reputation for persistence. A childhood spent in foster care had made her self-reliant, and she had little tolerance for injustice, especially against those who couldn't fight back. "Ethan?" she asked, taking in the scene, him kneeling beside the battered dog. "I was following up on a lead about missing retired canines, tracked it to this area." Ethan nodded toward the wall. "Recognize that?" Kate's eyes narrowed at the red vulture symbol. "Yeah, they've been running dogs through an illegal network, selling them, or worse." Shadow let out a low, hoarse whine, pulling Ethan's attention back to him. The dog's gaze was unwavering on that locked door. "Something's back there," Ethan murmured. Kate took a step closer, the snow melting off her boots onto the warped floor. "Whatever it is," she said quietly, "we'll find out. But first, let's get him out of here." Ethan slipped an arm under Shadow, feeling the dog's weight sag against him. He was lighter than he should have been, bones sharp under his coat. As they stepped back into the snow, the cold air seemed almost fresh compared to the stale rot inside. Behind them, the cabin stood silent, the red vulture's mark glaring from the wall like a challenge, and deep inside, that locked door waited along with the answers Ethan didn't yet know he was ready to face. Snow still clung stubbornly to Ethan's boots as he carried Shadow out to the patrol SUV. The dog's weight sagged in his arms, lighter than it should have been for a German shepherd of his size, bones sharp beneath the weathered fur. Ethan eased him into the back seat, wrapping an old fleece blanket from his emergency kit around him. Shadow's breathing was shallow but steady, his amber eyes never leaving Ethan's face, as though memorizing every movement. The drive to Silver Creek Veterinary Clinic cut through the heart of town. It was a small building with a red metal roof and frosted windows, tucked between the diner and a shuttered hardware store. Inside, the heat was immediate, the scent of antiseptic and hay mingling in the air. Behind the counter stood Dr. Hannah Brooks, a woman in her mid-40s, tall and angular, her posture straight as if she'd been trained to stand at attention. Her auburn hair was tied back in a low braid, and she wore simple jeans, a fleece pullover, and glasses that gave her a scholarly air. Hannah had served 10 years as a field veterinarian with the National Guard before returning to her hometown to open the clinic. That experience had made her calm under pressure, but it had also left her with little patience for people who neglected or abused animals. She came around the counter the moment she saw Ethan carrying Shadow. "My God," she murmured, her voice dropping. "What happened to him?" Ethan laid Shadow gently on the padded exam table. "Found him in an abandoned cabin outside the North Woods. He's mine. Or he was." Hannah glanced up sharply, her green eyes narrowing. "This is Shadow?" Ethan nodded. The recognition in her face said enough. Shadow's reputation as a disciplined, fearless canine had reached nearly everyone in Silver Creek before his disappearance. Hannah's hands were firm but gentle as she began her examination. Shadow flinched at the touch on his hind leg, a scar there still puckered and pale from an old wound. She checked his eyes, ears, and teeth, murmuring quiet reassurances in the tone she reserved for frightened animals. Ethan stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. When Hannah reached for a metal tray of instruments, one of them, a scalpel, slipped slightly and clinked against the stainless steel. In an instant, Shadow's entire body changed. His ears flattened, eyes wide, muscles tensing like coiled wire. With a guttural sound, he twisted as though preparing to lunge, though his injuries kept him rooted in place. "Whoa, easy." Ethan stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on the dog's shoulder, but his own breath had caught because, for a split second, it was as if he was back in that alley 3 years ago. The flash of gunfire, Ryan's shout cut short, Shadow's snarl as he broke formation to protect his handler, the chaos that followed, and then nothing. Ethan blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. Shadow's breathing slowed under his touch, but the tremor in his legs remained. Hannah looked between them. That's a trigger response. Someone's used metal chains, restraints against him, badly. Before Ethan could respond, the clinic's door swung open. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of snow and engine oil. Officer Kate Ramirez stepped inside, removing her gloves. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her breath visible in the warm room. She gave Ethan a quick nod before her gaze fell to Shadow. So, this is him. Ethan gestured for her to come closer. What brings you here? Kate rested a hand on the back of a nearby chair. I followed up on something after leaving the cabin. There was a truck big, boxy, with metal ventilation slats on the sides. I only caught part of the plate, but it had a rack of cages in the back. It was parked less than a mile from where you found Shadow. Ethan's brow furrowed. Transport for the Red Vultures? Kate's lips pressed into a thin line. Likely. And here's the thing, the truck smelled like heavy industrial oil, the kind mechanics use on older diesel engines. At that, Shadow's head lifted. His ears twitched, nose working, a low rumble in his throat. Ethan crouched beside him. You know that smell, don't you, boy? Shadow's gaze flicked between them, sharp and alert despite his exhaustion. Ethan remembered it now. When they'd entered the cabin earlier, Shadow had frozen, sniffing the air before fixing his stare on the locked back door. That same scent had been in the room. Hannah, who had been listening, leaned in to check the dog's neck. Her fingers brushed through the matted fur until they stopped at a small, raised scar near his collar line. When she parted the fur, Ethan and Kate could see it clearly, a thin cut shaped like an X. That's no accident, Hannah said grimly. That's a mark. Someone did this on purpose. Ethan's jaw tightened. The Red Vultures had their signature in more ways than one. If they'd marked Shadow, they had intended to keep him or break him. Kate straightened, the crease between her brows deepening. If that truck's still in the area, they're moving more than just one dog. Ethan glanced down at Shadow, his hand finding the dog's paw. Then we'd better find it before they disappear again. Shadow didn't move, but his eyes followed Ethan, steady and unblinking, as if he understood every word. The winter sun had already dipped below the jagged tree line when Ethan guided the SUV back toward the cabin. The headlights cut narrow tunnels of light through the swirling snow, the rest of the world fading into shadow. Beside him in the passenger seat, Kate Ramirez sat with a notepad balanced on her knee, jotting down a short list of potential leads from the clinic visit. In the back, Shadow lay curled on a thick blanket, head resting on his paws, his gaze fixed on the dark road ahead. The forest around Silver Creek at night was different, quieter, heavier. The snow muffled sound, but the stillness carried a tension that made Ethan's instincts hum. He'd learned long ago that danger often felt like this, silent and patient. They pulled up in front of the cabin. Its crooked silhouette loomed against the pale snow, the porch half collapsed on one side. No fresh tracks marked the path from earlier, just the thin crust of snow that had fallen since morning. Kate stepped out first, her breath blooming white in the freezing air. She wore a thick navy parka over her uniform, a wool beanie pulled low over her ears. The younger officer had a way of moving that was purposeful but cautious, her eyes always scanning, shoulders slightly tense, a habit from years of working in high-crime neighborhoods in Phoenix. Shadow hopped down from the SUV more slowly than before, but once his paws hit the ground, his head came up and his nose went to work. Ethan watched him take a few deliberate steps toward the cabin before giving a sharp bark. Inside, the air was colder than the night outside. The weak beam of Ethan's flashlight swept across warped floorboards, and the long shadow of the Red Vulture's symbol still glaring from the far wall. Shadow's nails clicked softly as he moved toward the back of the cabin, the same place he had fixated on earlier. The locked door was still there, the rusted bolt across it holding fast. Ethan tried the bolt. It resisted, groaning against decades of neglect. With a grunt, he forced it open, the sound of snapping rust echoing through the cabin. The door swung inward to reveal a small storage room. The smell hit them first. Stale fur, rust, and the faint tang of old blood. Against the back wall were 3 iron cages, their bars eaten through with rust. Inside one, an empty water bowl sat beside a chewed length of rope. Kate crouched, her flashlight catching on something near the base of the second cage. She reached in with a gloved hand and pulled out a tuft of fur, white, coarse, clearly from a different dog than Shadow. "Not his," she said quietly. "Means they had others here." Shadow padded up beside her, sniffed the fur, then gave a sharp, urgent bark. His tail was stiff, his stance tense, a clear signal he recognized the scent. On the dusty floor near the third cage lay a folded, water-stained scrap of paper. Ethan picked it up and carefully unfolded it. A series of numbers and letters filled the page coordinates. They were scrawled in a hurry, the pencil marks faint but legible. Kate leaned over his shoulder. "That's north of here, way out by the old service roads." Ethan nodded but kept scanning the paper. If these are accurate, they could be drop sites or holding pens. Kate stood, brushing dust from her gloves, and moved toward the doorway. The weak beam of her flashlight swept across the porch as she stepped outside, catching on something metallic half buried in the snow. She knelt, brushing it free with her fingers. It was a spent, shell-casing, polished brass dulled by the cold. Kate's brow furrowed. She turned it over, reading the faint stamp near the base. "This is .40 caliber," she said, her voice low. "And not just any brand. There's only one shop in the whole state that stocks this manufacturer." Ethan stepped onto the porch, taking the casing from her to examine it. His jaw tightened. "That shop's 2 towns over. If they bought this legally, there'll be a record." Behind them, Shadow let out a sharp bark from inside. When they returned, they found him standing near a section of the floor where the boards were slightly raised. His paws scraped at the wood, nails catching in the seams, his growl low and insistent. Ethan crouched beside him, running a hand along the edge of the floorboards until he felt it, a faint draft coming from below. With Kate's help, he pried up 2 warped planks, revealing a narrow opening into darkness. A wooden ladder descended into what looked like a shallow basement, but as Ethan's flashlight cut through the gloom, he saw the truth. It was a cramped storage pit lined with crates and rolled tarps. And on the far wall, pinned beneath a sheet of plastic, was a large map of the county. Red lines spidered out from the town center, marked with circles and small notations in blocky handwriting. The coordinates matched some of the marks. "This is it," Kate murmured from above. "Their whole transport route?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "They've been moving dogs, and probably other things, through these trails, using back roads no one checks anymore." Shadow stood at the edge of the opening, his ears pricked forward, tail rigid. The dog gave a deep, resonant bark that echoed off the basement walls, as though to mark the discovery as his own. Ethan allowed himself the briefest smile. "Good work, partner." The map they'd found in the hidden cellar was still spread across Ethan's kitchen table, weighed down at the corners by mugs and a half-empty thermos of coffee. Snow tapped against the window like a steady metronome, the storm outside turning the streets of Silver Creek into a white maze. Ethan leaned over the map, tracing a gloved finger along one of the red lines. "Here," he said, tapping a circle marked with a crude X. "If I'm reading this right, this is the old quarry road. Nobody's used it for years, too unstable for regular traffic." Kate Ramirez stood opposite him, still in her uniform, but with her jacket unzipped, revealing the dark tactical sweater beneath. Her hair, freed from the beanie, fell in loose waves to her shoulders. She was studying the map with the same focused intensity she'd had at the cabin, her pen tapping against her notepad. "You think this is where they've been staging the dogs before transport?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "The coordinates match. And there's an abandoned warehouse near the quarry, plenty of room. Easy to keep hidden." Shadow, lying on a thick blanket beside the table, lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's voice. His amber eyes followed the conversation like he understood every word. His breathing had steadied since the night before, but the stiffness in his movements was still there, each shift of his body carrying the weight of pain that never quite left. Before they could plan their next move, a knock at the door interrupted them. Ethan crossed the small living room and opened it to find Dr. Hannah Brooks standing there, her parka dusted with snow. Hannah stepped inside, brushing the snow from her braid. "I thought I'd check in," she said, setting her leather medical bag on the counter. "And I needed to see Shadow again." Her gaze landed on the dog and her expression softened, though the professional concern never left her eyes. She knelt beside him, running skilled fingers along his spine and down his legs. "He's stable for now," she said, straightening, "but his muscles are strained and his hydration's low. If he pushes himself too hard before he's ready, he could relapse fast. That kind of stress could be fatal for a dog his age." Ethan glanced at Shadow, who gave a faint thump of his tail against the blanket as if to disagree. Kate crossed her arms. "He's already proven he wants to be involved. When he caught the scent of that oil yesterday, he knew it meant something." Hannah sighed, looking between them. "I get it. I've worked with working dogs long enough to know you can't just bench them, but you'll need to pace him. Short bursts, keep him warm, and if he shows signs of collapse, you stop, no matter what." Ethan agreed reluctantly, though in his gut he already knew Shadow wouldn't be sitting this one out. Kate reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was the spent .40 caliber bullet they had found in the cabin's basement. She placed it beside the casing she'd picked up on the porch. "They're the same manufacturer," she said, her tone decisive. "And I checked, there's only one shop in the state that sells this brand." Ethan picked up the bag, turning it over. "And you think whoever bought these is connected to the truck you saw?" Kate nodded. "The store keeps a log of all ammunition sales. If we can get the records, we might have a name or at least a pattern." Shadow pushed himself to his feet and padded over to the map on the table. His nose brushed over one of the marked routes, then moved to another, his tail giving a short wag each time. Ethan watched him carefully. "He's tracing something," Ethan murmured. Kate crouched beside the dog. "You recognize these trails, don't you, boy?" Shadow gave a low, affirmative bark. His ears were pricked forward, body tense, not the stiffness of pain, but of focus. Ethan met Kate's gaze. "He's still got it. We follow his lead." Hannah exhaled, but there was a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Just remember what I said. He's tough, but he's not invincible." Ethan folded the map, tucking it into his jacket. "Neither are we. But we're going to end this before they hurt another dog." Shadow stood between them, a living bridge between the past and what lay ahead, his presence a silent promise. He wasn't done yet. The road to the old quarry was little more than a scar through the forest, swallowed in places by creeping pine roots and patches of ice that glittered under the moonlight. Ethan kept the headlights dimmed, the SUV crawling forward to avoid the deep ruts hidden beneath the snow. In the back, Shadow stood braced against the seat, his nose pressed to the narrow gap in the window, drawing in the cold night air with sharp, focused breaths. Beside Ethan, Kate Ramirez scanned the tree line with a small pair of binoculars. She had swapped her patrol jacket for a black tactical coat, the kind with reinforced elbows and pockets sewn in odd places from years of field modifications. Her expression was tight, the kind of look she wore when replaying memories she'd rather not revisit. As the road curved, the skeletal outline of the abandoned quarry came into view. Rusted machinery jutted from the snow like the bones of some ancient creature, and the corrugated metal siding of the warehouse reflected the weak light of the moon. Ethan pulled the SUV off the road, parking behind a stand of spruce trees. "We go on foot from here." Kate nodded and slung her compact rifle over her shoulder. She glanced at Shadow, who had already jumped down into the snow, paws sinking an inch into the powder. The dog's ears swiveled, tail rigid, his body angled toward the quarry as though some invisible thread were pulling him forward. They moved in silence along the edge of the tree line. The air was sharp enough to sting, every breath puffing into a small cloud. Halfway to the warehouse, Kate broke the silence. "Last year," she murmured, "we almost had them. Phoenix PD got a tip shipment of stolen weapons coming through an industrial park. We had them surrounded, 5 units in position." Ethan glanced at her but kept moving. "What happened?" "They brought out the dogs." Her voice flattened. Retired canines they'd stolen, muzzled, chained, but they made sure to put them between themselves and our lines. None of us could risk a shot. By the time we secured the animals, the vultures were gone. Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over them. Shadow's steady pace ahead seemed to echo the unspoken truth. These men had learned how to weaponize loyalty itself. The warehouse loomed larger as they approached, its sliding doors crooked on their tracks. One bent just enough to allow a man to slip through. Shadow stopped suddenly, his head lifting, ears snapping forward. Then came the sound, a faint, muffled barking, high-pitched and desperate, carried on the wind from somewhere deep within the quarry. Kate froze. "You hear that?" Ethan nodded once, his pulse quickening. "Let's move." They slipped inside through the bent door. The air inside was colder than outside, carrying the heavy scent of oil, damp concrete, and animal musk. Shafts of moonlight cut through holes in the roof, painting thin silver bars across the floor. Shadow took the lead, his nails clicking softly against the concrete as he followed the sound. They passed stacks of broken pallets and rusting barrels until the barking grew louder, joined now by a chorus of low whines and the metallic rattle of chains. At the far end of the warehouse, partially hidden by hanging tarps, was a makeshift pen. Ethan and Kate pushed the tarp aside to find a row of chain-link kennels, each barely big enough for a dog to turn around in. 6 dogs were inside, 5 German shepherds and 1 Belgian Malinois, each with a thick chain around its neck. Their fur was dirty, eyes wide with fear, but they weren't feral. They stood and leaned toward the visitors, tails wagging weakly at the sight of people who weren't shouting or striking them. Shadow stepped forward, tail low but wagging, pressing his nose to the first kennel. The shepherd inside sniffed back, letting out a short, almost relieved bark. Shadow moved from kennel to kennel, each dog reacting as though he were delivering some unspoken promise. Kate crouched beside one kennel, her gloved fingers brushing the chain. "These aren't strays. They've been trained. Some of these collars are custom issue. These are all working dogs." Ethan scanned the walls, his eyes catching on a clipboard hanging near the gate. The papers were smeared with grease, but the handwriting was clear enough. Dates, numbers, and what looked like coded references to deliveries. Shadow turned suddenly toward the far corner of the pen, where a stack of heavy crates sat under another tarp. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then looked back at Ethan. Ethan moved to him and pulled the tarp aside. Behind the crates was a narrow doorway, the frame reinforced with fresh lumber. A heavy padlock hung from the latch. Kate eyed it. Locked. Ethan gave a grim smile, producing a small pry bar from his jacket. "Not for long." The lock gave after a few seconds of force, and the door swung inward. A short, narrow hall stretched into the darkness, lit only by the weak beam of Ethan's flashlight. The barking from before was louder here, mixed with the shuffling of paws on concrete. When they reached the end, they found a second room lined with kennels, these ones occupied by dogs that were younger, leaner, their muscles coiled with nervous energy. Each kennel had a tag breeds, estimated age, and notes on training potential. Kate's jaw tightened. They're cataloging them like merchandise. Shadow walked the row, stopping at one kennel where a young shepherd pup lay curled against the back wall, too weak to stand. The old canine's nose touched the bars, and the pup's eyes opened, just enough to focus on him. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "We get them all out. Tonight." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it wouldn't be simple. The sound of a distant engine rumbled somewhere outside, carried faintly through the metal walls. Shadow turned toward the noise, body stiff, his bark low and warning. The rumble of the approaching engine grew louder, bouncing off the warehouse walls like a drumbeat. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Kate. She was already moving toward the pen's gate, fumbling with the heavy latch to free the first row of dogs. "Move fast," he hissed, checking the magazine on his sidearm. "They'll be here any second." Shadow paced near the doorway, head low, ears forward, every muscle taut. He gave a sharp bark. An urgent warning, just as the warehouse's sliding door screeched open. 2 men stepped inside, both wearing heavy winter coats and dark knit caps. The first was broad and heavy-set, his beard frosted from the cold. The second was leaner, his jawline sharp, a scar running from the corner of his mouth to his ear. Their boots crunched over the icy floor as they advanced. "You lost?" the scarred man called, his voice dripping mockery. "This place is private." Ethan didn't answer. His stance shifted, weight balanced, weapon angled low but ready. Then, from behind the men, more figures appeared, 3, maybe 4, silhouetted against the dim headlights of the truck outside. The metallic click of a rifle being chambered echoed through the cold air. "Kate, get them out," Ethan said quietly, without taking his eyes off the intruders. Kate dropped to her knees, working the chains off the first 2 kennels. The freed dogs bolted to the far corner, tails low, but eyes bright with hope. The scarred man lifted his weapon, and the moment cracked wide open. Gunfire erupted, the sharp reports deafening in the enclosed space. Ethan dove behind a stack of crates, splinters spraying across his arm. Kate flattened herself against the kennels, shielding one of the dogs as a bullet sparked off the chain link beside her head. Shadow lunged forward, teeth bared, darting through the hail of sound and movement. One of the armed men broke formation, circling toward Ethan's flank. His rifle came up, Ethan caught the motion in the corner of his eye. And then Shadow hit him like a living missile. The man went down hard, his weapon skittering across the floor as Shadow's jaws clamped on his forearm. The attacker howled, thrashing, but the old canine held fast, his growl rumbling deep. "Good boy," Ethan barked, grabbing the fallen rifle and swinging it toward the next threat. From the pen's far side came another sound, a deep, commanding bark. Ethan turned just in time to see a massive black and tan German shepherd barreling toward him. This dog wore a ragged collar with a faded police tag still hanging from it. Kate glanced over, eyes widening. "That's Duke, Phoenix Canine. He went missing 2 months ago." Duke didn't hesitate. He positioned himself alongside Shadow, the 2 dogs moving in uncanny synchronicity as if they'd trained together their whole lives. Gunfire slowed, replaced by the heavy sound of boots scrambling. One of the red vultures broke for the far corner, yanking at a tarp covering a stack of crates. Ethan followed, rounding the corner, and froze. Under the tarp was a small armory, crates stenciled with foreign lettering, boxes of ammunition, and several rifles propped in a makeshift rack. The gang hadn't just been smuggling dogs, they'd been stockpiling weapons. Shadow padded into the space, nose twitching. He gave a low growl, then barked sharply at one of the crates. Ethan pried it open to reveal boxes of .40 caliber ammunition, the same make as the casing Kate had found. Kate's voice rang out from across the warehouse. "Ethan! Door!" He spun in time to see the heavy interior door slam shut behind her, a metal sheet crashing down over the opening. Kate was inside the kennel room, now sealed off, pounding on the barrier. "Hang on!" Ethan shouted, but a red vulture stepped into view between them, a pistol in hand. Before Ethan could line up a shot, Shadow was already moving. He darted between crates, muscles bunching, and launched himself at the gunman. The pistol fired once, the bullet sparking against the concrete, but Shadow's weight took the man down. The scuffle was short and brutal, ending with the weapon skidding away and the man groaning on the floor. Ethan grabbed the keys from the man's belt and sprinted to Kate, unlocking the barrier. "You good?" he asked, scanning her quickly. She nodded, breathing hard. "Yeah, let's finish this." By the time the last of the gunmen were subdued, some groaning, some unconscious Duke and Shadow stood side by side in the middle of the warehouse floor, tongues lolling, chests heaving. They were battered, but unbroken. Ethan met Kate's eyes. "We've got the dogs, and their whole supply stash." Shadow gave one last sharp bark, as if to punctuate the victory. The warehouse was quiet now, the echoes of gunfire replaced by the steady panting of dogs and the low creak of the building settling in the cold. Kate was kneeling by the last freed kennel, murmuring to a trembling Belgian Malinois while slipping off its chain. Duke stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye, his head held high. Ethan moved toward the far corner of the warehouse where Shadow had barked earlier. There, half hidden behind a stack of ammunition crates, was a battered metal cabinet. Its surface was scarred with dents, the paint chipped away to reveal rust beneath. He tugged at the handle. It didn't budge. With a grunt, he pried it open using the same crowbar he'd carried since the cabin. Inside were ledgers, sealed envelopes, and a small, dust-covered external hard drive wrapped in plastic. The drive had a strip of duct tape across it with a crude black V, scrawled in permanent marker. Kate walked over, her gloves smudged with dirt and grease. "Please tell me that's what I think it is." Ethan held it up. "If they're keeping digital records, this is everything. Transactions, locations, contacts, maybe even the hierarchy." On the top shelf of the cabinet was a manila folder. Ethan pulled it down, flipping through quickly. His stomach tightened as he saw a series of grainy surveillance photos. Ryan Miller, captured from different angles. Most were dated from before the ambush 3 years ago, but one was marked only a week before his death. Wedged between the photos was a single page, covered in tight, messy handwriting. Ethan scanned it, his jaw tightening. They weren't just after Ryan. They were after what he knew. Names, safe houses, drop points, and when they couldn't get it from him. His voice faltered, eyes flicking toward Shadow. Kate's brows furrowed. "They took Shadow." Ethan nodded grimly. 3 years. They tried to break him, and he never gave them anything. As if sensing the weight of the words, Shadow padded over, sitting heavily at Ethan's side. His amber eyes met Ethan's, calm but tired, a silent acknowledgement of the years lost. Kate glanced at the folder, then back to Ethan. "We need to move. The FBI's going to want this yesterday." They gathered the documents, tucking them into Ethan's gear bag. Kate produced her phone, activating a portable scanner app she carried for fieldwork. She snapped image after image of the gang members they had subdued, careful to catch the distinct tattoos, scars, and facial features. "I'll send these to the FBI's identification unit," she said, thumbs moving quickly over the screen. "And the hard drive, once we get to a secure line, I'll have their cyber division start pulling data." From the shadows near the doorway, a new voice cut in, a deep, steady tone. It belonged to Agent Marcus Bell, a tall, broad man in his late 40s with a shaved head and a long wool coat dusted with snow. His skin was a deep bronze, his gaze sharp but not unkind. He carried himself like someone used to walking into dangerous rooms and leaving with the upper hand. "I'll take that drive," he said, striding forward. "FBI's already setting up at the sheriff's office. You've stirred up a hornet's nest here, Cole." Ethan passed him the drive without hesitation. "Just make sure it stings back." Bell's eyes shifted to Shadow. A faint smile touched his lips. "This the one from the files? The unbreakable dog?" Ethan's voice softened. "Yeah, they had him for 3 years. He didn't give them a damn thing." Bell crouched slightly, meeting Shadow's gaze. "Then we owe him more than a medal." As Bell left to coordinate with his team outside, Kate zipped her jacket and glanced around the warehouse one last time. "You know," she said, "if Shadow hadn't held out this long, they might have moved everything before we ever caught a whiff." Ethan rested a hand on the old dog's neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath his palm. "He bought us time. Years of it. And now we finish what Ryan started." Shadow stood, giving a short, resolute bark. The sound seemed to fill the empty warehouse, not just as a signal of readiness, but as a promise. He was still in the fight, and he wasn't alone. The first snow of February dusted Silver Creek's main street, settling on the old brick facades and the strings of lights draped between lampposts. The courthouse steps had been cleared of ice and dressed with a simple stage-wooden podium at the center, folding chairs in neat rows, and a banner strung across the front that read in bold letters, "Silver Creek honors its heroes." Ethan stood off to one side of the stage, his uniform pressed sharp, badge polished to a mirror shine. The cold stung his ears, but his focus was on the German shepherd sitting calmly beside him. Shadow's coat had regained some of its old sheen after weeks of care, though faint scars still marked his muzzle and flank. A navy blue service vest, newly issued, rested on his shoulders, the patch on either side reading Honorary Canine Shadow. Kate Ramirez arrived just moments later, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She wore her uniform as well, a special response team insignia newly stitched on the sleeve. Her hair was neatly braided down her back, a few loose strands catching the sunlight. She caught Ethan's eye and gave him a grin that was equal parts pride and disbelief. "You ready for this?" she asked, glancing down at Shadow, who thumped his tail against the stage floor. Ethan smiled faintly. "I think he was born ready." The crowd that had gathered was a blend of townsfolk, law enforcement from neighboring counties, and a scattering of federal agents in plain clothes. Near the front sat Sheriff Dean Holloway, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with silver hair and a gravelly voice, whose decades in uniform had given him an instinct for reading people and dogs. Beside him was Mayor Linda Carver, a petite woman in her 50s with a warm smile and an ability to remember everyone's name, even if she'd only met them once. She wore a long wool coat the color of winter sky and carried herself with a quiet dignity that made her speeches memorable. When the ceremony began, it was the mayor who took the podium first. She spoke about the resilience of Silver Creek, about the dangers faced and overcome, and about the unlikely heroes who could unite a community in gratitude. Her words painted the events not as a grim victory, but as a testament to loyalty, courage, and the bonds between people and their animals. "Today," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd, "we honor those who risked their lives to bring justice to our town and safety to the voiceless." She gestured toward Ethan, Kate, and Shadow. The applause rose instantly, sharp, genuine, and sustained. Sheriff Holloway stepped forward next, holding a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a gold medal suspended from a ribbon of deep blue. "For extraordinary service, bravery in the line of duty, and unwavering loyalty," the sheriff intoned, "we award Shadow the Silver Creek Medal of Honor." Ethan knelt so the sheriff could drape the medal around the dog's neck. Shadow held still, head lifted, amber eyes scanning the crowd as if recognizing the moment. The applause swelled again, and this time there were whistles and calls of "Good boy" from the front rows. Kate was next to be called forward. Sheriff Holloway pinned a new badge to her uniform, a special response team designation, and congratulated her on her official promotion. "You and Cole will be leading our new K-9 unit," the sheriff said, his gravelly voice tinged with pride. Silver Creek couldn't ask for better. When the formalities ended, the stage cleared slowly. People came forward to shake Ethan's hand, to kneel and scratch Shadow's ears, to thank Kate for her service. The cold air was filled with the mingled scents of fresh snow, hot coffee from a vendor cart, and the faint musk of working dogs. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the snow in gold and rose, Ethan led Shadow toward the edge of town where his truck was parked. Kate walked with them, her new badge catching the light. They paused on a small hill overlooking Silver Creek, the rooftops dusted white, the streets glowing with lamplight. Ethan crouched beside Shadow, running his hand along the dog's strong neck and over the medal that rested against his chest. "You're home now, old friend," he murmured. Shadow leaned into him, tail flicking once before settling into the snow at Ethan's feet. Kate looked out over the town. "Feels like we closed a chapter today," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yeah," and started another. In that quiet moment, golden light fading, the town safe for now, and the steady warmth of Shadow at his side, Ethan knew this was more than just an ending. It was a return, a promise kept, and a bridge between the past and what lay ahead. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder in the sky or fire from heaven, but in the quiet return of a loyal friend. In the wag of a tail that never gave up, and in the courage to stand by what is right even in the darkest moments. Shadow's story reminds us that God's hand can work through loyalty, love, and endurance, guiding us back home no matter how far we have wandered. In our daily lives we may face battles no one sees, carry wounds no one knows, yet, like Shadow, we can choose to keep faith, hold on to hope, and wait for the light to break through. It is often in these small, steadfast acts that we see the presence of God most clearly. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and write Amen if you believe that God still works miracles in our world. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless each of you and your families with strength, protection, and peace.